Hey folks, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I'm pretty overwhelmed and filled with gratitude for each of you being here. I do want to take a minute to call in some plant allies and some ancestors, both direct and common, into the space. Those who I knew and those who I didn't, those common ancestors to whom we owe so much, and some of those who would be pretty aghast at me sharing some vulnerabilities with y'all today. But I know that they still form a circle of love and support around me. As I prepared for today, my main struggle was trying to figure out which story of change from the last decade I should tell. Is it finding a new faith in Earth-centered traditions? Or maybe starting my anti-racism journey, unlearning my white dominance? What about how I took a stand in leaving a nonprofit, which I had poured my heart into and helped found? These stories and so many others have been integral in shaping the person I've become. But what I determined today is that my story is not about one single experience, point in time, or even person that changed me. It's about the daily work in unlearning all of the wounds and norms of the dominant culture, from white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism, among others, that have taken so much from all of us. Now let me pause for a minute to name that I come from a place of significant privilege. As I discuss the ways I've been impacted by the dominant culture and norms, I am also a white, cis, bi woman with straight privilege who grew up in a professional, middle-class family that truly loved me. And that created a life around me that is almost wholly safe and comfortable. But I also believe that folks with dominant identities lose a part of our humanity, which is compromised in the exploitation and at the expense of others. But this is small in comparison to the actual violence and trauma experienced by my siblings who are Alanim, trans, undocumented, gay, poor, disabled. And to paraphrase Aboriginal activist Lilla Watson, I think it's vital that folks who hold privileged identities examine how our liberation is tied up to the liberation of others. So many of you who are here today, and also who might be watching this later, have been integral in this journey for me. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart and with every atom of my being, thank you for your support, your advocacy, your patience, and willingness to help me learn and grow and hold me accountable so that I can show up as wholly as I am. The stories that I'm threading together over the next 10 minutes, I hope to demonstrate that healing is not finite or linear. These are just a few ways that perfectionism, politeness, numbness, and martyrdom have impacted my journey of healing from my own trauma, and my journey is certainly not the only way. As I've said, sitting across from hundreds of survivors over the years, there is no right or wrong way to feel or heal after acts of violence, trauma, and loss. So I found my passion for social justice when I took a class on interpersonal violence prevention at NC State. And I owe more than I can ever express to those teachers and classmates. Thank you, Dietrich, who's here. And I remember being absolutely and wholly overwhelmed, partly because of my own unexamined trauma, but mainly in learning that the root causes of health disparities and violence, it betrayed the worldview that had been so carefully and invisibly crafted by my largely white and middle-class upbringing. Part of the socialization that I received told me that being perfect and following the rules of what was normal and expected in this culture would keep me safe because it was the right way. But what I learned is that complicity became written into my bones instead of resistance. And after I was raped by a peer, I learned that perfection does not, in fact, ensure my safety. And in fact, it was that same principle that then was used to justify and excuse the violence committed against me. Now, during what I refer to, not so maybe lovingly now, as my baby feminist phase, which, yes, is funny, yeah, I didn't have the tools or knowledge to grapple with complexity, like that folks can be both good people and do horrible things, or at least ignore the suffering of others. I had not yet done my own critical work of developing a language and an outlet for my rage. Looking back now, I know that I hurt folks that were close to me. I challenged them in ways that were not helpful or kind or thoughtful out of my own pain. There's a clip circulating right now of President Obama in which he rightfully calls out call-out culture. And he's right, calling out folks in ways that make them feel ashamed or judged is not helpful, and it isolates out potential allies from our movements. And I think we also have a responsibility to hold folks accountable, starting with ourselves. I have been willing to have courageous conversations with white folks and men in my life that have been deeply uncomfortable and have compromised some of those relationships because of our culture of politeness. I'm determined that there's still room for calling in folks towards growth and accountability because everything we do either supports or challenges the dominant culture. Beyond this perfection and politeness, the dominant culture also manifested in me that my feelings, especially my negative ones, were not things to be entertained, admitted, and certainly not discussed. And so the first individual who challenged me on this is probably not who you think. Some of you know I have a horse, Crudette. Now, Crudette is pretty special to me for a variety of reasons. We've been together for 17 years. She probably knows me better than anyone except for my parents and siblings. But she's not more special than my other animals. Let me be clear, I love them all equally. Okay. But the thing about Crudette is she's the most sensitive being I have ever met. I can often just think of what I want her to do next when I'm riding, and she picks up on those slight changes in my body and breathing and does it. Pretty cool, right? Unfortunately, this was not always an asset to our relationship. See, I've struggled with anxiety for a good portion of my life, though I didn't have a word for it until college. Looking back, I recognize how it manifested in escaping to books and reading as a child, and then how it became bubbling up as panic attacks in my teenage years. When I first started writing Crudette, she tolerated the shadow of fear in me. My racing heart, my mind distracted by all of the worst case scenarios, self-deprecating commentary. But slowly, as I got older and the anxiety got worse, she refused to participate in it. For a time, she would literally run away from me in the pasture. Here, I have a treat, I have an apple, run. It's fun. It's funny now, it really is. It made me furious at the time, though. And what I didn't realize at the time is that my pain and anxiety were hurting her, not only in the energy that I brought, but in the ways my trauma caused me to react instead of respond. I now realize that my fear of failure, of my feelings, of not being enough, made her scared too. Because in her horsey mind, if I was scared, there was definitely a tiger nearby that we both should run away from. She was really trying to protect me. By not processing my feelings, I couldn't be there for her in ways I needed. Her sensitivity means she needs a lot of calm and a lot of patience. And as I started to understand how my distress and my refusal to admit my needs had on her, I began to question how my emotions and my stifled emotions impacted others. Folk herbalist Emily Ruff talks about how pain that is not transformed is transferred. And if Crudette was feeling that pain, other folks in my life probably were too. I soon got that answer in a rather direct way. About 5 years ago, in my first semester of my MBA program at Elon, I completed a 360 self-assessment. For those of you that may not know what that is, you survey multiple groups anonymously to kind of get a full view of what your behaviors are like. I split my readers into the typical groups, supervisors, peers, students, but then I added another category, friends and family. My results from the survey were fairly unremarkable. I got some valuable feedback, determined professional growth areas, but there was one big surprise. In the category of empathy, I rated very high with everyone I worked with. Not surprising to me. But my friends and family painted a really different picture of me. Out of 5, the highest anyone rated me was a 3. Multiple 2s, and yes, even the dreaded 1. At first, I was annoyed, and I made excuses, right? It's the standards that women are set to do more emotional labor in their relationships, blah, 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 which is true, right? That is absolutely true. But the reality is I had thrown all of myself into my work at the expense of my personal relationships and my well-being. When I further interrogated this reality, it made sense. I had many models of older adults whose life work was synonymous with their identity, and doing the work I was passionate about felt good when I was doing it. But as I was teaching balance and wellness and self-care, I wasn't modeling those principles for my students. The internal work ethic and limitless optimism that I was taught were necessary for success actually created ideas in me that my worth is with what I can produce and that I will never be enough. It kept these ideas kept me in the hamster wheel of doing versus being. And after reflecting on these results and processing with friends and family, I made a decision. The most important people in my life deserve to see and get the best of me, not only the leftovers after I'd been used up. So I committed, bit by bit, to prioritize my own healing, draw and defend boundaries, develop realistic expectations of my capacity, and set goals for myself and my relationships outside of work. And I slowly saw changes in myself. In the work of growing love for myself, I also experienced my patience and compassion for others to increase. So in my healing journey thus far, I know much more about my own personal power, strategies for holding myself and others accountable, and finding balance in gratitude and outrage, joy and deep sadness. And what I can commit to you is that I'm going to keep doing my work. I know that this journey will never be over. Even in preparing this story, I struggled with perfection and shame and the bindings of professionalism. How will people think of me after sharing this story? Will it negatively impact my success? Shouldn't I use this opportunity to talk about my very marketable strengths? I struggled in believing my own value in sharing. However, I remembered what I tell students at Take Back the Night and what I truly believe, that the power of using our voices to tell hard truths is a gift towards healing for ourselves and for others. I am so grateful that Elon has provided me scores of opportunities to learn with and from amazing humans, to develop my strengths, to heal, and to understand justice better. At the end of the day, what I've found is that my own sensitivity, like Crudette's, which I now define as my deep feeling of connectedness to nature and to others, is a strength. It allows me to sit with the pain in this world, mine and others, and be changed and motivated to do something about it every single day. What I've learned for me, love, real love, for each other, for myself, for the environment, includes both healing and accountability. Thank you.